I think the definition of green buildings is fairly well established. We have LEED, we have BREEAM, we have all different standards to define green buildings. So that's a known. Smart cities is more of an unknown. In any city, buildings are basically 80% of the asset value of the city. So cities are buildings. So it makes sense, obviously, that a smart city is going to have a lot of green buildings in it, whether they're under BREEAM, whether they're under LEED, whether they're under Green Star, or Green Mark, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. So green buildings are essential. You're not going to find a smart city that has no green buildings in it. I think we still have to work out what we think we want to do with smart cities. So there's always the confusion between government sector and private sector. So to spur smart cities, generally they're government-led, but often they're private sector-led because private sector thinks they can make money out of smart cities. So there is a natural, almost a tension between government and private as to what the sector does. Now, in a perfect world, government's role is to put in place an enabling environment to allow the private sector to then do what needs to be done. We haven't got there yet with smart cities because it's so new, so ill-defined, that both private sector and public sector are still trying to work out what they actually do. I think the challenges are still, especially for green buildings, is the fundamentals of real estate. So especially with a retrofit. So when you go into a, let's call it a brown city, where you're trying to make it green, that becomes a retrofit issue. Now, retrofitting a green building from an engineering point of view is very easy, very well established in terms of this is the methodology, this is the return you get. But the fundamental of real estate is such that building owners are basically very loath to actually make a change to their building unless they're losing business. So it comes back to, this is where government has to step in and put in signals to the market as to how the market should behave. And a lot of cities around the world are actually trying to put forward retrofit programs and put in place policies and incentives to enable this to kind of start to happen more strongly and quickly. Every smart city that I've been to, or let's say aspirational city that wants to be smarter, it's all about quality of life. So smart cities tend to do two things. It improves quality of life, and hopefully by doing more with less. So it's actually cheaper and more efficient. So there's an assumption that technology will enable all of these things and make everything better and cheaper and easier. That's eventually going to drive costs down. Singapore is obviously a shining light as an example of that. And what Singapore is very, very good at doing is not so much an individual thing, it's actually the collective approach. So Singapore is very, very good at saying we need to be a smart nation. We'll put in place a PMO and we'll start to work out how all of the agencies can work together to make Singapore a smarter nation and a smarter city. And if every city kind of did that, they would all improve because it just starts with some pretty boring fundamentals, which is let's get together, let's plan, let's define what we want to do, and then define how we get there. So it comes down to what we call the 3 Ps: policies, programs, and projects. And if you go through that, you'll move the needle and the city will become smarter and better.